So that takes us through to the 20th century. And here we get why people feel so this so strongly just now in the last 20 years or so. And I'll just go through one or two of the
Yeah, yeah.
things, because this goes to your question, which started all this discussion, is why do we live in a post-truth, post-fact world, and Trump and so on and so on. So one which we've discussed a good deal is the rise of China and alternatives to our whole system. So that really challenges us, as I said, at a fundamental level. This is not another monotheism challenging us, but it is a polytheism. It's a way of looking at personal identity, at social relation, at how a political structure can be organized, which is of a totally different kind. So it challenges us as Japan did, but Japan no one knew about, but China people do know about. So we feel, many people, and that's obviously behind a lot of the anxiety about China, they feel this is a really credible possible alternative, but one we don't want. But they will threaten us in that way. So better dead than red, as the old expression went. A second, which is very familiar, but just has to be listed, is social media. I mean, the obvious effect of that is that any kind of universal, as they now say, narrative or statement can't exist, because all you have to do is set up your little website or Twitter or whatever and proclaim that, the rapture is here, or Trump won the election, or whatever, and people will flock to it. So you have little pools of alternatives, self-reinforcing. I mean, before, if you had some mad notion, you might persuade someone else in your village that, basically the moon was made of cheese, or whatever it was you believed. And so you had a small group of moon cheese believers. Well, that was it. Now you say the moon is made of cheese, and you have followers in India and everywhere. And who's to say which is right? Who is the arbiter? If you can convince people, then you are right. So that has had a hugely destabilizing influence, obviously, on certainties.
So that erosion of gatekeepers, the kind of thing that Reef's BBC and all that stuff, that's all been swept away, and we're left with no authority, nobody
able to say. Even in speech, I mean, you and I are old enough to remember when you could only speak in one way on the BBC. And now, if you speak like that on the BBC, you're thrown out. You have to speak in
that beautiful clipped English that
now it's, so that sort of Essex man has prevailed, or whatever. And it's linked to another thing, which when I taught media through lectures and so on a bit, which was, people don't always remember, it's changed from what used to be called broadcasting, what's now the opposite, which is narrowcasting, which meant that that's related to the BBC. Before there were 4 channels or even 2 channels or whatever, and everyone listened and watched the same television, same thing. Now you have it, you have hundreds of channels and hundreds of, so no 2 people, you can't sort of, as you used to be able to go up to someone in your village and say, did you watch that film last night? And they know what film you're talking about. Now, who knows what film they've been watching? Now, that's one effect of the media, but another one which struck me as very interesting, which occurred in the 70s, 80s. One of the interesting thinkers in anthropology was a man called Irving Goffman. And some of his work was about the difference between the front stage and the backstage. The front stage is what you present to the world when you go out onto the stage. So it is your public. It's what certain German philosophers and so on talk about the public and the private spaces and so on. So basically it's the public space, and there you present one face. Backstage is your own private life and so on, which may be very, very different. It was a concept used in anthropology too, for example, by Berriman in the Himalayas, where he looked at what happened publicly and everyone knew about, and then went behind it into the private backstage. Now, these two things were held well apart, but when television came along, the two collapsed into each other. And I remember the moment when I dramatically realized this was when the Queen came on to give her Christmas address. It must have been in the 80s, 70s, 80s. And my children were watching it. They were sort of young teenagers or younger. And this lady came on, and we all sort of stopped our Christmas food and said, the Queen has come, and we all, well, we didn't stand up, but, you know, we felt we ought to stand up. And she started, you know, my husband and I, and all this in this middle-class clipped accent. And my children said, who is this old biddy? She doesn't know how to act. Look at her clothes. And, you know, get her off. I don't want to watch this rubbish. And suddenly I realized that they had seen behind her and seen the falseness. And then, of course, all the revelations about the royal family came out, and about the private lives of Profumo. I mean, some of it had all come out before, but now nothing was off limits, and journalism. So basically, you had no distinction between private and public. And this was a great undermining of authority. You realized, you know, what judges were really up to in their private lives, and so on and so on, and politicians. So it undermined authority, and it undermined certainty.